up this morning with my mind.
There you go.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
On behalf of the session, I'd like to welcome you to Grace Covenant Presbyterian Church. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement. The land that the church is on today on Merriman Avenue was land along a main thoroughfare of trade and travel for the people we know as the Cherokee. Merriman Avenue and Broadway Lexington Avenue were both trails the indigenous communities created and used. Not far from where the church sits, at the top of the hill between Merriman Avenue and Lexington, is an ancient Cherokee gravesite. The Cherokee didn't believe in owning land, much different than the views of the European colonizers who took it from them and brought the concept of ownership of land. The church sits in the city of Asheville, named in 1797 after North Carolina Governor Samuel Ashe, who never lived there, but who enslaved many people to accumulate his wealth and social and political capital in this state. Merriman Avenue is the name of a man who not only enslaved people to generate profit that they did not share in, and that they were held captive to secure for his heirs and not for theirs. But his life's work was to defend and shore up the institution of slavery in order to protect the economic interests of white people. Augustus Summerfield Merriman, U.S. Senator and Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, wrote, "Slavery has certainly existed from the earliest times down to the present, and it would seem that it is, in one sense, of divine appointment." By the 1850s, this land was taken and claimed by a white slave owner, John B. Whiteside, who was an organizing member of the First Presbyterian Church in Asheville. When the Presbytery purchased the land in the 1950s, our newly formed Grace Covenant Church benefited from the unjust economic benefits for white neighborhoods created by redlining. As we gather tonight, let us remember this history of this land and remember that we are committed to the repudiation of the doctrine of discovery that authorized the genocide of indigenous people and the enslavement of people for the economic gain of those in power. And all that Christianity was appropriated as a way to authorize the violence. This community of faith will not tire in our commitment to healing those deep wounds. We acknowledge our complicated and painful history of this land, and as Christians in a denomination deeply formed by whiteness. Here at GCPC, one of the ways in which we lean into our mission statement of theological curiosity, moral courage, abundant compassion, beloved community, is our commitment to the process of dismantling white supremacy in our bodies, our relationships, our church, and our community. O Heavenly Spirit, we thank you that you instilled in us the curiosity to be here tonight to talk about the novel Kindred. We pray that we have the courage to realize that this is more than just a novel, but a recognition of real trauma for Black and brown people. Please continue to grow in our hearts a compassion for each other and to do the work, to start and do the work to be the beloved community that you desire. Amen.
It's my privilege to welcome you to this, the fourth in our... What? Fifth?
Yeah.
Okay. I read fourth in the... I'm corrected. Fifth in our summer racial justice series, The Work of Mutual Liberation in the Life of Faith. The Power and Race team was formed and exists to provide this congregation and community with learning opportunities and awareness around race, power, and privilege in all sorts of ways. PART offers an invitation for you, me, everyone, to engage and grow together as followers in the way of Jesus. As we seek and find and enact ways of speaking truth to power, specifically speaking truth to the gross inequities, the sufferings, the cruelties, the hard realities grounded and perpetuated through race and poverty that are entrenched in the laws and institutions of our country and in our organized religious structures. PART invites us to create and make changes through community and mutual commitment to building God's shalom. And MC is going to lead us in a song.
Not quite. More like a grounding exercise. Y'all don't want me to sing. You go leave me right there if y'all want a little song. And remembering what Ms. Jane was saying with piggyback, that the system that was designed to work is still working. Mm-hmm. So being grateful for the work that GCPC is doing to uproot white supremacy and divorce from white supremacy culture. So I'm honored today to be with you all. Thank you. So remembering that your nervous system doesn't know the difference between a physical threat and an emotional or social threat, and some of the information that we were just hearing, I want you to Well, I'm going to invite you to sense into your body right now and what you're physically experiencing. And notice any heaviness or restriction. You feel that? It don't feel good, does it? So we're not going to lean into that. So I'm going to take you through an orienting exercise that ends up being grounding, if that makes sense, okay? So I'm going to ask you to look around the room because it's about your nervous system knowing that you're physically and emotionally safe in this space and in this conversation to release that heaviness and that tightness and restriction, okay? And you two at home, are y'all at home? Okay. So I'm going to invite you to look around your area, look all the way around, and I want you to notice 5 green things in the room. 5 green things. We are orienting to our space, and it's really about a 360, so you got to turn around to let your body know you're safe. Yeah. 4 yellow things. Keep turning, keep turning. 4 yellow things in the room. 4 yellow things. 3 brown things, and not including us. Don't be funny. 3 brown things. Right. 2 red things. And 1 purple thing. Purple. 1 purple thing. Just 1. So now I'm going to invite you to do another body scan and notice did any of your tension release, right? Any of that tightness or constriction release? I'm going to invite you to notice the breath in your body and where it is. Where do you feel it? And let's take 1 good breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. Now, one more time, because I think I caught some people off guard, right? One more time with intention, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Ready? Go. Everything in 3s. One more time. You ready, Kelly? You ready? All right, all right. This time, remember that you're taking in all of the goodness, all the work that we're doing. And we're just blowing that thing out. Okay? Y'all ready? Shake it out. Shake it out. Shake it out. All right, thank you. And if you get jolted as you're walking, right? If you get jolted during the conversation, remember, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, notice the breath.
Thank you, MC. I'm going to leave the mic out with y'all if somebody wants to be in charge of when somebody wants to say something, to get in the mic to folks. Tonight we're going to have a conversation about this book. It's there's so many things for us to explore together. We're going to start with one of Octavia Butler's last TV interviews before she died suddenly at the young age of 58. She, I think that she had a stroke. She just fell in her yard. And we lost a genius, really, somebody who was just such a creative muse for our culture. So we're going to listen, we're going to watch the video. She is talking about all of her work, not just Kindred, but it's really wonderful to hear, number one, some of the things that really inspired her to write science fiction. But also, amazing,ly we are not really reading one of her science fiction books. This is kind of a genre-busting book that we've read. But listen to how she describes you know, the books that she did write that are science fiction, The Parable of the Sower, The Parable of the Talents, those were 2 books in a trilogy that never got finished. In so many ways, she predicted the things that are happening right now in the United States. So just listen with an ear for the fact that she died in 2006. So Kyle, you ready?
We turn now to one of the last television interviews given by the visionary Black science fiction writer Octavia Butler. In November 2005, she came into Democracy Now!'s old Firehouse studio. Just 3 months later, Butler died on February 24, 2006, after she fell outside her home outside of Seattle, Washington. She was 58 years old. Butler was the first Black woman to win the Hugo and Nebula Awards for science fiction writing. She was also the first science fiction writer to receive a MacArthur Genius Fellowship. Butler's best-known books include the classics Kindred, as well as Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, 2/3 of a trilogy that was never finished. Published in 1993, Parable of the Sower is set in the 2020s in California. That's right, the 2020s now in California, amidst a global climate and economic crisis. Octavia Butler described them as cautionary tales.
They were what I call cautionary tales. If we keep misbehaving ourselves, ignoring what we've been ignoring, doing what we've been doing to the environment, for instance, here's what we're liable to wind up with.
In her books, Octavia Butler also wrote about slavery, about fascism, about religious fundamentalism, and so much more. Her work inspired a new generation of Black science fiction writers. She's been called the mother of Afrofuturism. And Octavia Butler's audience has continued to grow. In September, she made it the New York Times bestseller list for the first time, 50 years after she began writing and nearly 15 years after her death. Democracy Now!'s Juan Gonzalez and I interviewed Octavia Butler in November of 2005. It was shortly after Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans. President George W. Bush, the former governor of Texas, was in the White House overseeing the U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Part of this interview aired live, but some of it has never been broadcast before.
How did you first start writing science fiction? You grew up in Pasadena. How did you first become attracted to that type of writing?
Oh, I think I loved it because, well, I fell into writing it because I saw a bad movie, a movie called Devil Girl from Mars, and went into competition with it. But I think I stayed with it because it was so wide open. It gave me the chance to comment on every aspect of humanity. People tend to think of science fiction as, oh, Star Wars or Star Trek. And the truth is, there are no closed doors and there are no required formulas. You can go anywhere with it.
We're talking to Octavia Butler. Her latest book is Fledgling, wrote the Parable series as Katrina was happening, in the aftermath of Katrina. A lot of people were talking about Octavia Butler and how the Parable series made them think about that. Explain.
I wrote the 2 Parable books back in the 90s. And they are books about, as I said, what happens because we don't trouble to correct some of the problems that we're brewing for ourselves right now. Global warming is one of those problems. And I was aware of it back in the 80s. I was reading books about it. And a lot of people were seeing it as politics, as something very iffy, as something they could ignore because nothing was going to come of it tomorrow. That and the fact that I think I was paying a lot of attention to education because a lot of my friends were teachers, and the politics of education was getting scarier, it seemed to me. We were getting to that point where we were thinking more about the building of prisons than of schools and libraries. And I remember while I was working on the novels, my hometown, Pasadena, had a bond issue that they passed to aid libraries. And I was so happy that it passed because so often these things don't. And they had closed a lot of branch libraries and were able to reopen them. So not everybody was going in the wrong direction, but a lot of the country still was. And what I wanted to write was a novel of someone who was coming up with solutions of a sort. My main character's solution is, grows from another religion that she comes up with. Religion is everywhere. There are no human societies without it, whether they acknowledge it as religion or not. So I thought religion might be an answer as well as, in some cases, a problem. And in, for instance, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, it's both. So I have people who are bringing America to a kind of fascism because their religion is the only one they're willing to tolerate. On the other hand, I have people who are saying, well, here is another religion, and here are some verses that can help us think in a different way, and here is a destination that isn't something that we have to wait for after we die.
Octavia Butler, could you read a little from Parable of the Talents?
I'm going to read a verse or two, and keep in mind these were written early in the 90s, but I think they apply forever, actually. This first one, I have a character in the books who is someone who is taking the country fascist and who manages to get elected president, and who oddly enough comes from Texas. And here is one of the things that my character is inspired to write about this sort of situation. She says, "Choose your leaders with wisdom and forethought. To be led by a coward is to be controlled by all that the coward fears. To be led by a fool is to be led by the opportunists who control the fool. To be led by a thief is to offer up your most precious treasures to be stolen. To be led by a liar is to ask to be lied to. To be led by a tyrant is to sell yourself and those you love into slavery." And there's one other that I thought I should read because I see it happening so much. I got the idea for it when I heard someone answer a political question with a political slogan. And he didn't seem to realize that he was quoting somebody. He seemed to have thought that he had a creative thought there. And I wrote this verse. "Beware, all too often we say what we hear others say. We think what we are told that we think. We see what we are permitted to see. Worse, we see what we are told that we see. Repetition and pride are the keys to this. To see and to hear even an obvious lie again and again and again may be to say it almost by reflex, then to defend it because we have said it, and at last to embrace it because we've defended it, and because we cannot admit that we've embraced and defended an obvious lie. Thus, without thought, without intent, we make mere echoes of ourselves, and we say what we hear others say." Just one more comment on the human condition, I guess.
Octavia Butler, a lot of the themes of your books are about being an outsider. Talk about that, and talk about what it means to be. I mean, here you are, a science fiction writer. It is rare the way you weave in issues of race, issues of power, religion. I mean, it's rare to be a black woman science fiction writer.
It's true. When I was getting started, there was one other man, Samuel R. Delaney, and he was one of my teachers. And we were having a panel discussion at a library one day, and somebody asked, well, how many of you are there? And we looked at each other and we said, we're 2/3. There was one other man up in Canada who was writing, who has since gone a different direction. So things are better now, but there was a time when
Why
there
do
was
you think
almost
that
nobody.
is?
I think part of it is just because people do what they see other people doing. I had a student come up to me at Michigan State University, and this was a young black woman many years ago, and say, you know, I always loved science fiction. I've always wanted to write it, but I didn't think we did that. And she was afraid that if she got into it, there would be closed doors. And life is short. So sometimes people don't want to take the risk of running into closed doors. My friends said to me, you're doing all this, and we thought you were so brave, and after a while we decided that you just didn't have any sense. So I have never really wanted to do anything else.
So, let's just pause for a minute and take in this powerful voice speaking to us from the past, from the beyond, and how much potency she's speaking into our present with. Is there anything that you noticed about what Octavia Butler shared that you just want to note or kind of mark before we move on? Anybody?
I just heard so much of Tema Akun's as she reflected and read some of those quotes. I just thought, yes, it's checking off all those characteristics, and maybe before it had a name, but yeah, she's a powerful thinker.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy. Anybody else? I'm looking at the chat too to see if there's anything.
I'm just aware that, and she said it, that the things that we are seeing happening now, I read in books in the 80s. And it's like, and I was so frustrated because we couldn't wake up.
Yeah. Thank you, Jane. Anybody else on the video? Anything you noticed? Or just want to honor or mark or savor? All right. Well, let's dive into Kindred. So Kindred was published in 1979. It's not really science fiction. Time travel is a part of it, and there's a matter-of-factness about the way Octavia Butler, writes this story. She doesn't feel the need to explain how the time travel works or that it's happening. It just is, and it's very vivid and it's very real. The scholar at the end who wrote some remarks calls this a neo-slave narrative. Neo because it's not a first-person slave narrative, but Octavia Butler plays with that too, because she takes a present day person and goes back to the past, there is a firsthand quality to this, even though it's getting sifted through somebody's contemporary eyes. And one of the things I kind of took after I read all of this and just kind of sat with it was this capacity to imagine the past in the way we see the present. And really how the past and present and future just kind of collapse in this book. There's a conflation of all these different times. And I wonder if anybody has anything you noticed or want to share about that, particularly around Dana and Kevin, just kind of how they started to relate to the past as almost more real than the present. And then we're going to get into some other layers of that. But anything coming up for you and just this way that every time just sort of collapses on itself?
One of the things that we came up when I was discussing it with my brothers was the way in which this book was a sort of a precursor or anticipation of Back to the Future.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the same themes that got Back to the Future, tremendous exposure, tremendous financial reward, were similar in structure and in general not as well developed. But certainly with Harlan Ellison endorsing the book, that should have been a real positive start.
Thank you. Make sure you hold the mic up so folks can hear on YouTube.
The whole issue about home and the plantation and her relationship to that and the beginning to feel familiar. I felt I really had to sit on that.
Yeah. Yes, that was one of the areas. People are saying they can't hear Kyle. I don't know if the mics aren't talking to YouTube.
Yeah, they are.
Okay.
Check 1, 2.
Can you all hear on YouTube now? Okay. So,
Close.
yeah. So this idea about home, we can go on and dig into that, but I want to see if anybody else has anything about time and this kind of the way the past and the present and the future kind of are conflated, and being able to see the past in the way we see the present.
It seems like it's
Here, bring.
all one
Let's
thing.
get the mic.
It seems like it's all the same thing. It just looks differently. It presents differently, but it's all still oppression that's still continuing to happen. I didn't read the book, but I watched the series. So are they similar? Are they very similar?
They are similar. There's some big differences in the way the story gets told that we're going to talk about in a little bit. But I think what you're talking about and the way time is collapsed is similar. Yes.
And I noticed that what was the lady's name?
Octavia Butler.
No, Dana.
Dana, the main character.
Yeah,
Yes.
She didn't have a problem conforming because in her body she knew how to do that. Does that make sense? Because that trauma continues to pass through our DNA. But Kevin struggled, at least in the series, right? He struggled a lot trying to fit in and figure out what his place was. You know what I mean? But I noticed that in her black body, she didn't have hardly any, like I said, any trouble surviving the moment. Because that's what we do. Survive the moment.
Yeah. Thank you, MC. And I remember one comment that Dana made, this is in the book, I can't remember if this is in the series, but where she, for her first few visits but to the past, she thought that her contemporary mindset would protect her somehow, or that she could, it was like a both and. She was able to be in it and understand it and like, oh yeah, this is what this is, and oh, well, it's not really gonna, totally penetrate me the same way. And there's a real, at least in the book, I think it's a little bit different because the series doesn't even get, there's several more times when she goes back in the book that the series doesn't get to because it's just season 1. And Hulu canceled it. So there is not going to be a season 2 on Hulu. Maybe it'll be on something else. But there's several more layers of time that passes, especially for Kevin, who is left there for years without Dana. And then how that shifts them and doesn't shift them. I mean, it's, yeah, the book is different because you don't get as much in the series. Yeah. What else? I see Amy. I see some comments on the chat. Let me see. So one striking image, this is Andrea Rosal, that stuck with me was the image of the lights of the plantation coming to it from the woods, yes, and her missing it in a way, similar to the comment that was just made. Yeah, there was a weird, almost like, oh, I'm where I'm supposed to be kind of feeling when she got back to the plantation. I think it was like her 3rd trip, back. Go ahead, Amy.
Just time, the idea of time and how interconnected all of our histories are. Mm-hmm. The ways you try to explain to young people, of course you need to learn history, but all the history. And the other thought, I think, is just we can pretend or we can ignore what we want to ignore. I mean, I think that last quote she was reading from the Talents spoke to this, but it always catches up with you. You get, like, what's happened in the past is going to catch up. And it's going to be real, I mean, even more real. You can't ignore it.
Yeah, it's not lost on me that, that Octavia Butler's voice is saying, if you don't deal with things, and here we are, the planet is burning, white supremacy is, it's coming to a head. We're calling it out and it's lashing out back. We are at a place in terms of our economic disparities that's just so much more pronounced even than it was in the 90s and early 2000s. So many of the things that we just keep living with and how they are really coming to a head in a way that we haven't seen, and in a way that has weathered humanity in a different way. The global pandemic that we just went through was a different way in for us to experience, like, everything is over, it's stopping, it's done, you can't keep going like you thought you could. It's, that bodily sensation is now in our bodies, and we didn't have that just a few years ago. And in a way, she predicted all of that. So, go ahead. The mic.
And I believe that prophecy still lives, the prophetic, you know what I mean? Absolutely. It's prophecy. Right. That's what I believe too. There's a few folks that are still around that are still, you know, letting folks know this is what's coming. This is your warning. And then when we don't adhere to the warning, then we can't blame God for, because that's what happens, right? Why did he let this happen, or blah, 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 blah. It's us. You know what I mean? It's us not adhering. And I say this all the time. We can't change things that we're not admitting to.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. James Baldwin.
Absolutely.
He said that, you know.
So
you're not going to be able to heal a wound that you don't even acknowledge is there. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's an awareness and then an acceptance, and then you work through the change. And I think, if I may continue to say, what saddens me, like this place gives me hope. Because when I'm out in the world, what's sad to me is that there are so many people that, they know that things need to change, but they don't want to change.
Yeah.
And so that saddens me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, MC. We have a comment in the chat from Alexandra Lusak. I thought one of the extraordinary pieces of this narrative is the way the reader begins to feel bodily how Dana is more and more brutally oppressed, but Kevin is so easily able to fit in. And this is where the TV series drops off.
Okay.
But here, I mean, what you have ahead of you in the book that the series didn't get to was Rufus turning on Dana and crossing lines that she thought he wasn't going to cross.
But was it survival? I'm not saying it's okay, but that's what happens.
Yes, and that's part of what I think, that's part of the complexity that I think Octavia Butler gives us about not only the past, but the present, you know, the complexity of it. But what we see in those later parts of the book is extreme brutality and violence and terror that Rufus subjects Dana to, almost because he doesn't want her to leave him. That's his way to keep her around. And I don't want to spoil it for anybody that hadn't read the book, but it doesn't end well for Rufus, okay? It doesn't end well for Rufus. So, yes, I see Robin back there.
You know, I don't know the right words to say this, but you know the experiment that we all heard about where you take a frog and you put it in room temperature water and you increase the temperature every day and it just sits there and it starts to get comfortable with increasing temperature until it's boiling water, but the frog is just
it's too late
adapted and then he just dies. But that's the sense that shocked me so much with this book was how Dana was able to fit in with that oppression because it gradually got worse and worse until it became brutality. But she really felt, it seemed to me that she really felt like, well, this is how things were, and you know, I'm not here to change anything, just to try to do my job of making sure that my, you know, inherited person, what do you call that?
Right,
person?
her ancestor.
Yes, her.
Yeah.
That her ancestor is born and comes to life so that everything will keep going. But the part that really amazed me was how easily Dana was able to adapt to the plantation life.
So one of the things that she says is, she says this to Kevin after they're back in the present, after one of their experiences. She said, "I never realized how easily people could be trained to accept slavery." Dana says this to Kevin when they've returned to the present and are discussing their experiences in the antebellum South. Do we also, in the 21st century, still have conditioned responses to slavery? And that question is interesting to me because I was almost jolted when Dana said that to Kevin, because it didn't seem like it was that easy for her to me. She seemed like a very resourceful person who was kind of like reading the atmosphere and trying to figure things out. But there were a few like horrible jolts for her. Like when she thought at first that the kitchen house was just this idyllic setting where black people were safe and they could do things. And so she started teaching the two kids how to read. And then the thing that she thought would never happen happened. Master Whalen came into the kitchen house. And that's when she got beaten almost to death, because she was teaching those kids to read. And so I'm curious about those words. What is she talking about that was easy? Is it how quickly we move into survival mode? Is it how quickly trauma overrides, you know, the kind of impulses we have in safer situations? That when we're in trauma, we do a lot of things just to stay alive. And in the end, we see, you know, one of the main figures, again, I don't want to spoil it for folks that haven't read the book yet, but after all her babies were sold, she made a decision, I'm done, I'm out. I'm done. And so what was easy? I kind of don't, I'm kind of curious about that comment. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on that.
I already said it. Because the body keeps the score.
Yeah.
One of
Go
the
ahead,
things,
Jane. We'll bring it.
one of the things that I saw in that was how easily she adapted in this life to having to get by in that work environment that she had to live through, and that she adapted to it and accepted it.
That's another thing that's in the book, but not in the TV series, is her current day work setting.
But it was, but none of that was easy, really easy. But she used the words. It was natural. I don't know. It was like she adapted, maybe when she didn't want to.
Because she had to.
Right. I mean, she was surviving in both instances. And there was a big difference in the two instances.
Yeah.
No, but not really.
Well, and I almost see the comment to Kevin as almost the voice of a traumatized person. Like not fully cognizant of the impact. It's almost like she could not yet absorb the impact that this took her life. She couldn't live her life in the present anymore the same way. She would never feel at home in the present anymore. But she couldn't all the way absorb that yet. It was like a trauma-informed question almost.
Well, it almost seemed to me too that it was a forerunner to when she told him he didn't get it.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and MC had something about trauma.
I'm going to give it to you soon, MC. I haven't finished the book, so I'm going to answer this question based on Black woman in 2023. Because those same traumas exist today. And what I think is meant by it's easy is the fact that when you've been living in survival mode for so long, it doesn't really feel like you have a choice. That's why it's easy, because the choice is made for you.
Yeah.
The choice
Thank
is
you,
made
Libby.
because of the systems that are set up and the conditions in which you live. So it's easy because you don't really know any other way.
Thank you, Libby. That's very helpful.
I concur.
The choice is made for you. There's some kind of grotesque clarity. Yeah.
She said it. Oh, she said it.
Okay. Let me see. What else we have here?
The water's still boiling.
Yeah, that's right. The water's still boiling. Anybody else?
So, and easy isn't really the right word, but when I look at Rufus's acculturation, each time she comes back, he's moving more and more to the slave holder. And Kevin, in a way, moves into that culture, becomes more like that culture. So I felt like the white men in this become, they're the ones in my mind who I would say begin to fit in.
Yes. And she even says later in the book, when she and Kevin get to spend several days in the present together, because in the book they're married. In the series, they had just had a happenstance meet up and hook up, and boom, they're in this thing together. And so Kevin is almost this hapless, person, and you're like, oh, Kevin, he's trying, But in the book, they're married. And when they're back in the present and they're able to spend some more time together, she hears him talking, and he is really struggling. And he's really mad and frustrated that he can't live in the present anymore, that it kind of like screwed up his present. And she hears an accent in his voice where he sounds like Rufus and he sounds like Master Whalen, just a little bit. It's not a lot, but she hears it. And she says something like, I tried not to think about it, or I didn't make too much of it. And she then said, we're okay, we're good. I thought this might ruin us, but we're still okay. And it's like, you see some of those threads of just that, the oppressive nature of, of marriage and these relationships. And again, these survival skills that are just in the DNA around how to create some sense of normalcy, or some sense of it's okay, or it's not so bad, or he's not so bad. And there was some of that, you're the abuser that you know is better than the abuser that you don't know. Yeah.
He becomes her owner.
Here comes Kelly. Kelly, right here.
So I'm interested in the ideas that you all are talking about, that the book reflects. But I want to say something about me as the reader of this. And what I found was that Octavia Butler makes me feel personally, physically, various aspects of slavery. And I know that she's doing that on purpose. And so Dana witnesses a brutal beating of a man. And then, so she's distant from that in a sense, but then later she is herself beaten. And then Rufus sends her out into the fields
Yeah.
to work.
Mm-hmm.
And we experience what that's like, especially for someone who's physically weak the way she is. There's one moment in which she is complicit in the turning of Alice over to Rufus, because Rufus wants to sleep with her, and she doesn't want to, but Dana helps move him into Rufus's bed.
Mm-hmm.
And she's totally not comfortable with that. In other words, she makes a decision
Mm-hmm.
that she normally would think is morally wrong, but she does it because it seems practical.
Yeah.
So I was
Yeah.
intrigued by how,
Yeah.
I mean, I've been reading her for a long time,
Yeah.
so I'm familiar. I've read the Parable of the Sower,
Mm-hmm.
which I highly recommend, and just by the way, I heard on the radio that it's been turned into a musical
Yes.
on Broadway, and
Yeah.
that the person who's doing the music is, let's see, Ms. Reagan, what's her first name? Bernice Reagan, who was the founder of Sweet Honey in the Rock. And we heard in the background some of the music, and it sounds just like Sweet Honey in the Rock.
Yeah.
But anyway,
So,
this book has a kind of power on me in that it makes me viscerally feel aspects of slavery that she wants me to feel, and that's part of the art of the book.
So, thank you, Kelly. I want to stick with this for just a minute. There is a visceral quality to this book, and I do think it's intentional. That's the same in the TV series. The first episode starts with, I mean, I was like, I don't know if I can watch this. This is like terrifying. And I want us to sit with this for a minute. So Octavia Butler and the person who adapted Kindred to the TV series is not sparing us, not softening the terror and violence of slavery. And so in that way, we have some kind of different proximity to it. I hear what you're saying, Kelly. And I want to make a distinction between that sort of the visceral quality to an imaginative expansion and the actual experience of the trauma in your body. So I was reading this while I was sick. That's the reason I got finished with it, because I was just laying in bed. I was up all night, you know, like really not feeling well and reading it. And there was something interesting about reading it in ill health, like just being kind of not able to really move very well and kind of being in constant pain and just not feeling good. And one of the things that really hit home for me is this hurts, what I'm going through right now. And I have painkillers, I have people helping me, I have a bed to sleep in, I have a shower to take, I have modern medicine. You know, I mean, I have all of these things, and I'm still scared and it still hurts. And just the terror of this all-encompassing, there is nowhere to turn quality to chattel slavery. There was nowhere. There was no protection. And that's one of the things I felt like at the end of the book when Alice tried to run, and we all knew that wasn't going to be successful, and it wasn't. And the brutality that just had no limit. It had no limit. It had no limit. No amount of relationship. And I've been in an abusive relationship. I know what it feels like to be terrified and I know what it feels like for nobody to help me, but it's still the order of magnitude is, we can't touch that. We can't touch that. And I want to sit with that reality for a minute. Octavia Butler's genius in the way she does this book is, come closer to this. Be in it. Be in it as yourself. And I think she wants us to change. She wants us to change, and there's a limit to what we can get or feel. Is anybody else understanding what I'm trying to get at? If so, maybe it's others want to add, because this is tough. This is a tough, because there is such a visceral quality to this book. We have a few other comments in the chat. If does anybody else want to comment on that?
Oh, I just want to ask you, Marcia, when you were reading it and you were feeling not well and ill and pain, did it help you feel her pain even more deeper?
Like I'm saying, I don't think I can. I think it's just a little bit of a taste of the intensity. The intensity of it is overwhelming. Yes, Marta.
So I haven't read the book. I saw part of the series, and now I know that all the things that I need to go read the book. So, but what you were just saying, Marcia, resonated so much with what I heard Libby say, right? So we see it, or we read it in the book, and we have the visceral reaction. And it reminds me of our class on Revelations when it was like, and then it was so terrible and I had to close the book. And me asking, well, what about when you see it every day so close to you and you can't close the book, but you could go to your house and close the door and not feel it and not be in it. And so as I'm hearing you say that, Marcia, that yes, you were not ill, you were not feeling well and everything, and you still had a shower and you had care and you had food, and you asked us to sit with it, then it went so much deeper of hearing Libby say, I haven't finished reading it, but this is me every day as a Black woman that has to feel this, and for so long saying, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay, and then now finally beginning to say, I'm not okay, I'm tired.
Yeah.
And it's right here in our circle right now, that close.
Yeah.
So you don't have to necessarily be like in the book and closing it. Like you have it right here next to you right now.
Yeah. Did MC have, you have something, MC? And then I'm going to go to the chat. Thank you, Marta.
It's like, I talked to a few folks that have been doing anti-racism work for a long time, and I hear them say that they're so tired, like you were just talking about, Marta, and I've heard specifically, like, tired of us having to share our stories of trauma for white folks to try to identify, but can't ever identify, right? But to make it a reality for you. Like, we have to keep proving that it happened and it's continuing to happen. And I remember when I was in high school, I was told slavery wasn't that bad. It wasn't as brutal as people make it out to be. It wasn't nearly that bad. And I grew up with that, right? Which added to my own colonization. It wasn't that bad. So I appreciate folks like Octavia, like naming, and though it's hard to hear, it's hard to sit with, right? That it's real. And we do get to attach to it in a reading and feel that. And I think for Black and brown bodies, because again, the body keeps the score, as Dr. Basil talks about. And it's in there. It's in there. Though I haven't experienced it personally, my ancestors have experienced it, and it continues to show up in our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, and this isn't a spoiler if you haven't read to the end, because it starts, the book starts with what? With that Dana, it starts at the end, right? With her losing her arm. She loses her arm. And there is something so, again, so grotesque about the fact that that's irredeemable, that the past took something that integral to her functioning from her, and we don't ever really understand why, do we? We don't know why that injury happened the way it did. It doesn't tell you. But there's a violence at the end, and then when she's back in her house, her arm is gone. And I feel like that is just, again, this very embodied, very visceral, kind of, you can't even explain it, but that slavery takes something from black people. It takes something that impacts just life, period. And that affects the way we can all be in relationship. It takes something, it's different, it's not his left arm, but from Kevin too. He is very frustrated and angry that he can't just resume being in his life, And that is so resonant with what I hear white people saying in our present moment. Why do we have to talk about this so much? Can't we talk about other stuff? And it's interesting that, MC, you say you feel hope here at Grace Covenant. And I've just been in communication with a few folks who are leaving Grace Covenant, and both independently named that they don't feel hope here because we talk about white supremacy too much. And I think it's just an interesting thing to sit with. It's an interesting thing to sit with. For me, doing this work is the most hopeful thing I can do as a human being. I can't live if I can't do this work. This is the only reason for me to live at this point, I feel. To have integrity, this is it.
So, Marsha, as I hear you talk about, slavery taking something from black folks, well, what it took was our humanity.
Yes.
Right? It stripped us of our humanity. And it made us inferior, which is why MC was told, slavery wasn't that bad.
Mm-hmm.
Because the way history has been written and the way this country has been built, it is all under the pretense that anything black is less than, anything white is superior, and that white people are entitled to black labor. And so when you start to unearth the truth, and you start to put white people in a condition where they're uncomfortable, what you get to see is where we start to empower and restore the humanity of Black people, those people who don't truly have a heart for us as siblings in Christ, they exit. Because it's no longer about their comfort.
Right.
And it's no longer about their needs. But it's about restoring people to where God created us to be. We were never created to be less than. We were never created to be chained and shackled. We were never created to be beaten until you could see our bones through our flesh. We were never created to be, and I struggle with saying this, but I'm going to say it. We were tools. That's what Black people were. We were tools. We were a means to an end so that white people didn't have to sweat. So, although I hadn't finished the book, the first chapters that I heard, I was like, ooh. And when that woman was hitting her and she saving Rufus, I had an angry reaction. I was like, no, this did not. But I could feel, like, it was like, and it wasn't me in the book, but I could feel the swelling up in her, like, stop. Right? And I think that we still exist in that today. We're at a point now, call it Alabama brawl, whatever you want to call it, where Black folks are saying stop. It's not okay. The real genius of Octavia Butler is that her words not only have shown true around climate and things of that nature, but just around the aspect of humanity and what's happening with human beings within this country, and how we listen to lies so often that we don't know the lie from the truth. And how we, and I say we loosely, because I voted the right way. If there is a right way. Well, yeah, there was a right way. Anyway, the point is, we today, together in this room, we have an opportunity to do something different. And it's, whether it's through reading Kindred and taking up the spirit and embodying truth, but we have an opportunity to continue to fight to restore humanity. And if we work toward that end, there is hope.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's it.
Thank you, Libby. Thank you, Libby. So we have a few comments in the chat that I want to make sure get amplified. Mary in the chat has said quite a few things, and I'm just going to share some of Mary's comments. She said that she saw Kevin not being comfortable as a white man in the past. He struggles to find a way to fight the system. And again, in the book, he talks about that he, during his time when he left Maryland and went north, he did assist with the Underground Railroad, and he grew a beard because this was the time when Vesey had his attempted revolt, and so Kevin was trying to disguise himself so he wouldn't get killed for assisting enslaved people in finding freedom. Then she says, what fascinated her was Dana's love for Rufus. She wanted so badly for him to be better than he could be. And I don't know if she loved Rufus. I think she kind of was like, it's like he was her ancestor and she had to keep saving him so that he could father Hagar. And there was almost this kind of protective aspect to it, and I think she was hoping that he would be something different, but then he wasn't. He wasn't. And The way Dana tries to explain to Kevin the reality of slavery is much different than the portrayal of it in books and films, is ironic given that this is Butler's attempt to portray slavery. Yeah, Dana talks about in the book about how it's different than she had read about in the books. But then there's one place where she's like putting her bag together and she puts a history book in her bag because she thinks this might be helpful when I'm back there, you know. Let's see. Somebody else said, I believe it was Margaret Tierney. I'm looking for your comment, Margaret, in the chat, where they talk about that it's Rufus's fear of dying or him being almost dying that brings Dana back every time. He's in danger, and that's what brings her back. And it's her being afraid she's going to die that takes her back to the present. And at one point, she even slits her own wrists to go back, right? And there is this play of like the way that both of their fears and both of their mortality is what keeps them connected to each other and keeps them continuing to interact with each other, which is, again, the genius of the way she puts this all together is truly breathtaking. So let me just read a quote here about home. I'm on 190. This is Dana, and she realizes that Kevin has changed. This is where she says, he did sound a little like Rufus and Tom Whalen, just a little. Then she says, I could recall walking along the narrow dirt road that ran past the Whalen house and seeing the house, shadowy in twilight, boxy and familiar, yellow light showing from some of the windows. Whalen was surprisingly extravagant with his candles and oil. I had heard that other people were not. I could recall feeling relief at seeing the house, feeling that I had come home, and having to stop and correct myself, remind myself that I was in an alien, dangerous place. I could recall being surprised that I would come to think of such a place as home. That was more than 2 months ago when I went to get help for Rufus. I had been home to 1976, to this house, and it hadn't felt that home-like. It didn't now. For one thing, Kevin and I had lived together here for only 2 days. The fact that I'd had 8 extra days here alone didn't really help. The time, the year was right, but the house just wasn't familiar enough. I felt as though I were losing my place here in my own time. Rufus's time was sharper, stronger reality. The work was harder, the smells and tastes were stronger, the danger was greater, the pain was worse. Rufus's time demanded things of me that I never had been demanded of before, and it could easily kill me if I did not meet its demands. That was a stark, powerful reality that the gentle conveniences and luxuries of this house of now could not touch. That really sits with a lot of what we've been talking about tonight. Another comment came up just a second ago, then I'll get to you, Kelly, and that is around, it's something you said, Kelly, about Dana's thinking about assisting in Rufus's plot to get Alice in bed. And you used the word that she felt it was practical, even though she didn't like it. And I wonder if we could talk a little bit about virtue and how virtue gets really scrambled and how it becomes I don't know if I would use the word practical. And again, we've learned so much about trauma that Octavia Butler did not have. She did not have trauma theory. It didn't exist when she wrote this book. And we know now how trauma overrides a lot of our ways of reasoning through things or coping. There's a survival switch that goes on, and so we go to kind of a lower state of functioning, and we're just putting one foot in front of the other, and we do things that we wouldn't have done otherwise. And so for Dana, in that thing that she'd had to decide around Alice, we get to sort of hear her reasoning, right? And some of the ways she talks about it, that she's almost disassociating. She can see it all. And she can see how it's not good. She can also see that there is no good. She can also see that if she doesn't do it this way, that he's still gonna do it. She also knows that her own existence is riding on him impregnating Alice and Hagar being born. And I'm wondering how this really tangled up, snarled up kind of exposure of Dana making a decision, how does it speak into our present? Again, around some of these ways that white supremacy has said, like, you're either for us or against us. It's either right or wrong. It's either, this kind of feigned moralism that whiteness tries to play, like taking the high road about things when it's actually like, it's a lie. Like our justice system, it's not just. Our education system, it's not education, like how scrambled virtue becomes. And I'm just wondering if anything comes up for us in our current moment as we seek to heal, or as we seek to do good, or we seek to tell the truth. It's just so complicated. Anything come up for folks in that?
Marcia, as I hear you saying the justice, and it's not just, or with education and it's not education. I'm just like, well, it is just for some. It is education for some. And whom it was created for is who's thriving and growing and making it, right? And so, and then it makes me think of people who don't like what you're saying, or don't like what we are about, or that we're working towards collective liberation and what it takes, right? That our liberations are tied together. And if we find a way of not dismissing and being so afraid and really recognizing that this is collective liberation, to do it together, then people that live in white bodies that have so much access and power could make it be the other way. Just like I always say with the smoking in the restaurants, right? Not too long ago we could. And people that don't look like me said secondhand smoking is killing us and made it disappear.
Mm-hmm.
So just want to sit with that for a minute.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Marta. Any other thoughts on virtue or anything, or truth, or agency is another piece that comes up in this picture of Dana making a choice. A choice.
I mean, I think about impossible choices. They're not choices, they're impossibilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
I always love Toni Morrison's female characters for those same types of, like, the way you feel like that in her characters. And I guess I just think about how easy it is for privilege to put us up on these high horses of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a white, cis woman, all the things, all the identities I could relate to, I can make judgments. I do make judgments. I have made judgments. And that's not, I mean, as a Jesus follower, that's not what he was talking about either.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. That's where it hits me, is,
Yeah.
that's where it hits me.
Yeah, thank you, Amy.
Get off my high horse.
Yeah. Well, and didn't the Romans passage say that today?
Yeah.
Do not think of yourself more highly than you should. Yeah. This, yeah. Yeah. Other thoughts before we close? Oh, Kelly had something.
This is a question. Books and reading make a thread through this book.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious to, and she's an author,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a reader, and love books. So I'm wondering what she might be saying about the importance of reading. Dana, for example, receives her brutal beating from the father because she's reading his books.
Mm-hmm.
So what was the question?
Just what the thought about books, like, what do you think Octavia Butler is saying with that? Is that your question?
Yeah, I mean, she becomes a teacher
Mm-hmm.
of reading, and a literal reader.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking that that's important to
Mm-hmm.
Octavia Butler as a writer and thinker. And yeah.
It reminds me of what Nicole Hannah-Jones said. People who know their history will not stay in their place. And that's how you get free. As you learn, you have access.
Knowledge is power.
Knowledge is power, and being able to read and thinking about Octavia Butler as a young black woman, in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, and making her way as a science fiction writer. Truly, she blazed a trail, and she was able to really trust in her own imagination, which then is just, again, through past her natural life, continuing to call us all into this revolutionary and liberating imagination. I mean, this book gives us an imaginary that truly does change the way we can understand our present moment. And you can't say that about many things, really. Yeah. Oh, Eleanor, and then we'll go to MC.
So So I don't have all of this. I don't know that I understand all of this yet, but so what I think about is I've done a lot. I mean, I've done a lot of training. I've been in a lot of multiracial circles and done the work and done the action. But so I think, what is it that I need to do to be one more step? And I think when we talk a lot about trauma, you know, I've kind of othered it. And I think what I'm learning is for me to move and be more committed and more involved, that there's an element of healing my own trauma that will release me and allow me to move into whatever my next. And I think this workshop we went to, I didn't put that together until now.
Thank you, Eleanor. We got MC, and then we're going to close.
That was powerful, Miss Eleanor. I like that. Healing from our own traumas first. Yeah. That made me forget what I was going to say. I got caught up in that. I was like, yes, that was good. It's medicine. I wonder if, and she didn't say, right, in her interview, but I wonder if, like, putting the truth out there under the guise of science fiction so that folks would actually read it and then get the truth. She didn't say that's what she was doing, but it made me think.
Yeah?
That just maybe.
Yes. Because, I mean, when you think about it, what is more powerful than the imagination? To be able to imagine something that is not what your experience is, or what you have firsthand knowledge of, or whatever. That ability to take us to a place. Yeah. And the weird thing for us now is we're like, well, it's actually happening right now. You know, like, and we actually are experiencing something that she didn't. Yeah. But the power of the imagination to change the present is something that I feel like she's just like constantly helping us to practice. And that's kind of where I wanted to end with what the very end of the book. I'm not going to say part of it because I don't want to ruin it for people that haven't read it. Because I really do hope if you haven't finished the book that you will. That you will, because everything that she does at the end is just so important, you know.
So before you do that, can
yes.
I wrap up one more thing about trauma?
Yeah.
And I think that we hit it, right? Knowing that we go to our survival part of our brain, our hindbrain, when our nervous system gets jolted, right? And making those hard decisions. I'm glad that you had made a comment about being practical. That sat with me, and I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what I wanted to say, right? And it was that whole idea of, like y'all said, making impossible decisions, but our nervous systems makes decisions for us. Yeah. But what I love is that we can create new neural pathways to be able to take care of ourselves and have new responses, new visceral responses, right? Yes. That we don't always have to go to the negative thing or the horrible thing that our bodies are trained to do, right? And also our nervous system pulls on our memory as well. So while it's pulling on our memory and pulling on our body, by us practicing anti-racism work, right? We're creating those neural pathways so that when we get jolted, we do the right thing. We do the Christ thing. Does that make sense? We do the godly thing.
Yeah. And that, I call that getting new visceral data, like, and that I feel like is part of what we're doing at Grace Covenant. Is, again, this is not because Grace Covenant is perfect or we know how to do everything right, but we are generating visceral data together. And we don't even know what it is going to be sometimes. You know, we show up and things happen, you know. But this, what can happen when people, you know, commit to one another over time and say, we really want to be a trustworthy community. We really want to practice that together. And because some of the hardest stuff for trauma survivors is the shame that we feel because of the decisions that we made, the choices that were impossible choices, and we blame ourselves. And that I wish we had had more time to talk about agency, because that really, I can even feel it right here and right here, just bringing up that word. What is agency in such a thoroughly, you know, kind of violent and terrifying situation? What is agency? And yet there is agency there. There is power. There is, and I don't even want to say this word, but resilience. You know, there is a resourcefulness to Dana, and there is just an impossible quality to us even thinking that those are real choices. And what it kind of brings home for me is just like what Eleanor was saying. Our work on our own trauma is so integral to anti-racism work. We can't do it without it, because otherwise we are constantly moving from our trauma. We're constantly reacting that way to each other. And instead of really practicing those new neural pathways, which takes a lot of self-awareness. And it takes a lot of body work. And when you are still in trauma, you're not in your body. You've dissociated. You're just kind of moving around. You're a husk. You know, like that's what you have to do. And so, do you all see how all these things fit together? The body, trauma, our own work, and this space to generate new data around the truth of what was done and is still being done to Black people in America, and the truth of what happens and has happened to Indigenous and brown people in America. Building a community from that truth with these other layers. So I want to read this end, and then I have a question for you all to depart with. So this is at the end, when they're in the present. They want to go to Maryland from LA. Dana feels like she needs to go and go to the place where this house was and see if it was there. So they go to Maryland. And this is Dana. And barely then I thought, Kevin would never know what those last moments had been like. She's talking about hers back in the past. I had outlined them for him, and he'd asked a few questions. For that I was grateful. Now I said simply, self-defense. Yes, he said. But the cost. Nigel's children, Sarah, all the others. It's over, Kevin said. There's nothing you can do to change any of it now. I know. I drew a deep breath. I wonder whether the children were allowed to stay together. Maybe stay with Sarah. You've looked, Kevin said, and you've found no records. You'll probably never know. I touched the scar Tom Whalen's boot had left on my face. touched my empty sleeve. I know, I repeated. Why did I even want to come here? You'd think I would have had enough of the past. You probably needed to come for the same reason I did, Kevin shrugged. To try to understand. To touch solid evidence that those people existed. To reassure yourself that you're sane.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So my question for y'all as we depart, and I would love to hear your thoughts if everybody can promise to be brief. What's one thing from this time together that you want to spend more time with? One thing, and you don't have to explain it because you need to spend more time with it. So you're just naming it. And if we would like to just start, I'll start. I want to spend more time because I feel like it's a part of my own healing too with this idea of agency. Yeah.
I'll go next because I'm holding the mic. This idea of agency is, I don't get it, and I want to get it more. I only get like this much of it, like a fingernail. So much more.
Read more Octavia Butler.
Read this Octavia Butler. I read the Parable of the Sower, so I know her work.
Yes.
I guess recognizing trauma and not having to understand it.
Thank you.
The paradox of all the good and evil that is in me and in all of us.
Thank you.
I want to know why Germany was able to do all it did to recognize its sin and pay the money and teach the children, and we're so unable to do it.
Thank you, Eleanor.
I need to read this book.
Yes, sir.
Because I'm one of the few people here that hasn't. So definitely read this book and more Octavia Butler.
Thank you, Bill.
The easy answer for me would be to go ahead with another book, so I'll take that option. The Parable of the Talents was their biggest award winner, and yet it was a long time after it came out that very prestigious, I think it was the Hugo Award was given. And it's really interesting to see how her style changed over the 20 years.
Thank you, Larry.
Continue working on my compassion and understanding when I hear things that I'm like, but why? Why is this still happening?
Thank you, Marta.
Recognizing the ways that inaction or comfort or just the ways that we turn away, how those are as much a choice of violence as some of the choices that we saw in this story.
Thank you, Lindsay.
I think finding and believing truth when it's shared.
Thank you, Maggie.
There's a lot not going through my head right now, so I guess one of the more recent is probably the healing of my own trauma and our own.
Thank you, Malachi.
Being in relationship in these discussions is powerful.
Thank you, Lee.
I need to figure out how to be able to hear in community, because this is my trauma right now is I never understand anything because I can't hear. I have really expensive hearing aids, and I still can't hear. This is really frustrating.
Yeah. Thank you, Robin.
Well, one thing I will do is finish.
Louder, Mary, louder.
Finish reading this book, continuing my own internal work and exploring the agency.
Thank you, Mary.
Continue reading as much as I can and work on that embodied healing and encouraging others to be reflective.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy.
I think thinking more about what Eleanor said about healing from trauma in order to be able to do the work.
Thank you, Ash.
I think, well, first I'm going to finish the book. But sitting with being, and this is going to sound weird, but getting comfortable with fear, right? That's what I want to delve a little deeper into.
Thank you, Libby.
I think right now I'm really involved in a journey of healing from trauma, and I think that something I could do to expand upon that is try and grow in my comfort and courage to utilize my gift of sort of translating information from a very biochemical understanding sense to things that are more accessible to people in my circles.
Thank you, Isabel. So we need to get MC and Trina, and then we've got folks in the chat.
Of course, finish the book, right? But continue to evangelize and pick up those folks that are on the pariah and have been pushed out of the church because of all the oppression and the isms, but have a desire not only to be in connection with God, but be in connection with God's people. If that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Trina, think you'll be sitting with?
I just want to continue to have discussions like this, even if it's not in the church, in the community. Yeah. And I also want to know more about Octavia Butler.
Yeah. Thank you. So in the chat, we have a few things. Alexandra Lusac said she wants to get the 1619 project and read it. She wants to go deeper into that. Margaret Tierney, I want to sit with how white supremacy culture creates trauma in my own body. And Nancy Gaskin, embodied healing is what I'm sitting with too. So there were several other folks. If anybody else wants to share anything in the chat, please do. We have one more minute, but I'll look one more time. I want to thank you all for being here tonight, but also just really mark that we are culminating a 5-part series that we've had here this summer. And just want to name kind of where we've been together. We started with Tammy and I exploring a chapter that I wrote for an anthology about embodied brokenness in white Christianity. And we talked about avoidance and aversion and intellectualization in white church, in white Christianity. Then the next program we had was Priscilla Robinson here talking to us about urban renewal in Asheville-Buncombe County with an amazing detailed, just down into the granular details of the way urban renewal has impacted our community and continues to impact Black people in Asheville and Buncombe County. Then we had our powerful reparations panel with folks who are involved in the reparations conversation and movement here in Asheville-Buncombe County in different capacities. You know, had a really full room of people that were from all different parts of our community, and a powerful discussion. And that work is ongoing. That discussion didn't kind of culminate or resolve anything, but hopefully it galvanized more engagement. And then we had Tammy Forte Logan here to look more deeply at the 1619 project. And that was our program right before this one. And where we got to spend some time, we almost pulled an Octavia Butler, right? We were looking at our past, but we used it to look at the present in a different way at the Montgomery Brawl, and just how having the eyes to see what's happening right in front of us, how important that is to liberation. And then tonight we spent time with a creative genius, a woman who was a prophet and a poet, and had an imagination that was divinely inspired, I believe, and speaks to us from beyond about our present and our future and our past. So this is good work that we've done together as a community, and I just pray that we can continue to build on it. Everything we do at Grace Covenant is infused with this work, and we're learning what that means. We don't have all the answers, but we do have one answer that we need to all remember: we cannot do this alone. We are in it together, and together keeps growing, which is beautiful. And so that feels like a beautiful way for us to end tonight, that this isn't the end, and that we keep growing and we keep expanding and we keep deepening, and we're only, it's only becoming a richer, deeper, thicker conversation, and for that I am very, very grateful. So good night, and I hope everyone can rest. And thanks to our folks on YouTube.
I want to thank you for your leadership. Yes. I want to thank you for your leadership and just your unwavering commitment to this work. And I can only imagine being in your position and how hard it must be. And yet you were like, and this is what we're doing. And the medicine that is coming in for, I'm hoping all of us, right? Not just Black and brown people, but for all of us that are really committed to collective liberation, and that we can see it. And so I just want to thank you for that leadership.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you. It's an honor to do it. It's an honor.
I think we also have to acknowledge, I'm not going to curse, but it came to my head, but I'm not going to let it come out my mouth, that you've been through your own hell this summer.
Oh.
And going through all that you have gone through, the fact that you stand here tonight, having had surgery last Monday, is a testament to just how faithful and committed you are. And you might be white, but you my sister.
Well, that keeps me going.
I know y'all heard that saying, sister from another mister.
Yeah.
You are forever my sister.
Thank
and
you.
I love and appreciate you.
Thank you, Libby. This is my life's work. I'm not stopping.
And shouldn't we end in song?
Yes, come on,
Started in
Libby.
song.
Come on,
Why are
Libby.
we not ending it? Do we have a drum up there?
Because I did have a word of encouragement, if I may. I've been sitting on it for
I don't know. May you?
Okay. I want to encourage you
Here.
all not to get weary in your well-doing.
Here, get the mic. Come on. No.
Because I'm fitting to say something. So I wanted, talking to Mike, talking to camera, I want to encourage you all not to get weary in your well-doing, and don't give up, right? And I know y'all hear this talk about assignment. Marta says it all the time, but I too have been taught that we're all here on an assignment. and not to get discouraged about the people that are going to leave, because that means that this is not their assignment. And I'd rather for them to exit and not cause more harm, and let them go and do what God has them to do wherever they need to do it at. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am. We gonna sing?
Yeah, look, we started this series with a song. I don't think, Mike, I think we all gonna do this together.
Don't have my mic on, Kyle. I'm not singing solo. Somebody else can hold this puppy. Are we?
Right? All right. We woke up this morning with our minds set on freedom. Woke up this morning with our minds set on freedom. Woke up this morning with our minds set on freedom.